Welcome to Building the Future, hosted by Kevin Horick. With millions of listeners a month, Building the Future has quickly become one of the fastest rising programs, with a focus on interviewing startups, entrepreneurs, investors, CEOs, and more. The radio and TV show airs in 15 markets across the globe, including Silicon Valley. For full showtimes, past episodes, or to sponsor the show, please visit buildingthefutureshow.com.
Welcome back to the show. Today we have Oisin O'Connor. He's the CEO and co-founder at Recharge Payments. Oisin, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on the show. I think what you guys are doing at Recharge Payments is actually really innovative and cool. But maybe before we get into that, let's get to know you a little bit better and start off with where you grew up.
Totally. So I grew up in San Monica, California.
Nice.
Both my parents are originally from Ireland, so first generation. Yeah.
Cool. So you went to college. What did you take and why?
Well, traditionally I was not a good student, so I didn't get into any colleges coming out of high school. So I went to community college, and originally I focused on art and architecture.
Okay.
And then from there I pivoted into business and economics, and then I moved into teaching myself how to program. So kind of a roundabout way, and ended up graduating with economics from UCLA, but kind of multifaceted in a lot of different areas.
Interesting. So what got you to shift into economics and then into programming?
Well, I mean, what I loved about art and architecture was the idea that you can kind of create anything, right? You have your imagination and you can see where the world is going and what you can build. But what I learned, especially in architecture, and both my parents are architects, is that it's just so slow moving. And it felt like if you want to be innovative and you're a builder, the place to be was in software, right? And I just didn't know about it till later on in my kind of journey in education. And once I discovered it, I fell in love with the idea of building software products.
Very cool. So you get out of university. Walk us through your career up into coming up with the idea for Recharge, and let's dive into that.
Yeah, totally. So I graduated in like the worst time ever to get a job. So in 2008, during the economic downturn, and the only job I could get was at Deloitte Consulting, and I was kind of like on the consulting finance side of things. And from day one, I just hated my job. It was like first day there, orientation, and I was like, how do I get out of this?
Wow. Wow. Okay. Well, fair enough.
And so, I probably don't make a good employee, So I love my manager and people there, but it was definitely not the right fit for me. Unfortunately, no one else was hiring. And, coming from immigrant parents that kind of had very little, I promised them that I would stick with the job and, for a couple of years and kind of get that on my resume. So I told them 2 years, and on the day I quit.
Wow. That's awesome. Good for you, man. That's great.
Yeah, I know, right? It was like that Jerry Maguire moment where you quit your job and you're jumping up and down. So, but during that time, a couple things happened to me. One, I met like an early mentor that was a software entrepreneur and in the tech space in the late 90s, and so he kind of showed me what you could build and what you could create. And this was 15 years ago, and there was tech startups were not that big of a thing even in LA.
Sure.
So I saw that kind of view, and so the first also in that time I helped kind of grew and was heavily involved with a nonprofit that did microfinance in the developing world. And through that, I saw a lot of the needs around, the idea of, crowdfunding and crowd mobilization. And this is like pre-Kickstarter or just around the same time. Right. And so like my first startup was actually leaving Deloitte to build one for the nonprofit space.
Cool.
And it was kind of like the right idea for crowdfunding, but completely the wrong market. Nonprofits were the worst to sell and market it to.
Yeah,
and
sure.
Yeah. And so I did that for a couple of years. And, it got to, let's say, 15 people, and it was profitable and it was working, but it was, I think they call it a walking dead in the sense like it wasn't going to go anywhere. And so I quit that and kind of wound that down. And then from there, I started to evaluate, what I wanted to do next and, what excited me and what worked and what didn't work the last time around. And there was kind of two things I came to is one, you can't create markets. You have to choose the markets. And what I mean by that is like, there's going to be these bigger, societal changes that happen. And the best thing is how do you harness those changes and take advantage of them and build, interesting problems or companies that solve problems, right?
That's actually really good advice.
Yeah, right. Like, don't waste your time in shitty markets.
No, you'd be surprised at how many, and I've been guilty of it myself, but so no, I think that's really good advice. But keep going, sorry.
So, yeah, and I think, I love reading, biographies and stuff. And when you read a lot of biographies, especially people from, the Robin Baron age, you see that a lot of people had to try lots of different things and they had to like find the right timing for the right markets.
Totally.
And I think people oftentimes think these things are like, this brilliant idea that comes out of nowhere. And like, that's very rarely the case. Totally. And so, the other thing I kind of realized at the same time was, as a person, I was like fundamentally flawed, like as we all are.
Okay, sure.
And like, I was like, man, to build a great company, I would have to balance myself out. And, I looked at my first kind of like failed startup and I was like, what I was really good at was kind of like a sense of product, coming from that arts and architecture background and then later software. I had a really good sense of like, opportunities and how to bring things together. But what I wasn't great at was when something got to like 80%, I wasn't great at taking it to 100%. And in the sense that like, oftentimes it's a different temperament of the person who can just like drive something to completion. Sure. And so, in that sense, I found my co-founder, Mike. And so we started working together and he kind of like had the opposite weaknesses as mine. And so together, I always feel like we create this like, perfect human being, but, separate, we're very flawed.
So how did you guys meet?
It was funny, like, as like, the tech startup scene was so small in LA and this, even when we started working together, maybe like 8 years ago, and, I started to do these barbecues just to meet people. And so I do a barbecue and, I was actually living at my parents' house because I like didn't have any money.
That's awesome.
Like, and so I just met lots of people in technology and, and I had it in the back of my head that I would need to find the right pieces for my next business and my next endeavor. And I was searching for that. And then I met my co-founder and I was like, very early on, I was like, wow, this is the guy, and I think, it's probably, like anything relationship wise is when you meet the right person, you just get that subconscious feeling and you just go for it.
Sure. So how did you guys come up with the idea for Recharge and what exactly is it? Or actually, what was it when you launched and how has it evolved over time? Let's dive into that after.
Yeah, totally. Well, I think first is we chose the market, right? So we chose D2C commerce. We thought that was like, we spent a long time evaluating what were the big macro trends. And at the time, this was 8 years ago, there was two big trends that we thought were interesting. And one was commerce and the other was crypto.
Sure, interesting.
And yeah, definitely, I bought a good number of Bitcoin back then, but I should have bought more like everybody.
Sure.
And, when we chose the market and then we wanted to understand what were the interesting problem sets. So we decided actually to start a development agency and to launch lots of different products. And the idea was, how do we create fast feedback loops on like what is important in this market, right? Okay. And so we actually launched 6 different products before Recharge, and Recharge was the 6th product, and it just took off like crazy.
Wow.
And it was kind of a crazy year. That was about a year process of just lots and lots of velocity around, building things, launching them, trying to sell and market them. And it was a very low ego process in the sense that if somebody didn't hit the metrics that we wanted or the velocity, we just scrapped it, And, I think people oftentimes ask me, like, how do you know when you have product market fit? And like, as somebody who's had a lot of products that haven't worked out, you just know. It's just like hitting a vein where people are screaming at you for more of it.
That's fair.
And kind of what was early on the impetus of the idea was that we started to see more and more merchants wanted this ongoing relationship with the end shopper. Right. And, this was at the beginning of kind of like Amazon subscribe and save and subscription boxes. And we realized like there was no platform that kind of enabled you to run these programs and then to grow these programs. And so that was the beginning, and when we first launched, it was super basic. It literally was like a web form that you could throw up on your page and collect credit card information. And then we would manually charge people's credit cards and create orders in their e-commerce store. So we we completely hacked it MVP just to see how it would be reacted in the market, and right away it just took off. So that was kind of like the beginning. And then throughout the last, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was going to say that's actually amazing and actually really good advice, because I think a lot of startups start out exactly how you just mentioned it, where a bunch of stuff is manual. Not everything has to be automated out of the gate, especially to validate an idea. And I think that's actually really good advice for people listening, because like, why automate something that you can manually do at the beginning when you don't have a ton of traffic or customers? Because it's easier to shut down a company that, you've only spent maybe weeks or months on than if you spent 2 years building something and then people hate it, right?
Yeah, 100%. Like you get like a sunk cost fallacy for anything you ever put out in the world,
Totally.
and like where you want to hold on to it, you want to stick with it. And it's very hard for you to let go. And, I think also what I've realized is like, if you really have product market fit, oftentimes you need very little to get that momentum, to charge a customer money. And if your thing is going to always rely on the next feature or in your mind, it's probably you don't have that fit, right? Because it shows that you're not unique enough in the world to get started, So,
Sure.
But yeah, it was crazy. I mean, even the sign up flow was not automated. So it was my Google Calendar. I had like a Calendly link with my calendar, and people would just set up time to talk to me. And literally I was doing 20 calls a day, just setting people up on the system manually in like PHP my admin. And then I would code at night based on people's feedback of what needed to be automated. So a little crazy.
That's amazing though. That's what it is, right? Especially at the beginning, especially when you're bootstrapping, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's super focused, scramble, whatever you need to do to get to the next step, and yeah.
Sure. So how has Recharged evolved into what it is today?
Yeah. So I think, once we launched Recharge and it was like hitting a vein, and we knew there was something there, we decided all the other products that we built, we actually sold them off. So they became like our seed money.
That's smart.
Yeah, I think we were lucky. They were generating some small amounts of revenue. And, so we sold them for like $250K, and that was kind of like our seed round.
Nice.
And, what we realized early days was like, the e-commerce space was so young and all the stores were really small that it was really about how to make this thing turnkey and ease of use, right? How do people just get going? And so for, let's say, the first 2 years, that's all we did was just like, we really focused on that and how to make it so that people could get this thing set up within minutes, right? And then we started to see a shift in the e-commerce market where basically people started to get bigger and bigger, and people start to value customization, right? And so that's when we made kind of this, I wouldn't say pivot, but we started to move into becoming a pure API first platform. And that was the current wave that we're riding right now, is how do we provide kind of the building blocks for people, one, to start these programs, and then two, to grow these subscription programs. And then in that period of those like two distinct phases, we went from, 3 people in an apartment to, 600 people plus, all remote,
Wow.
in the company. And then we went from, that $250K of seed investment from some of those apps to, we did, I think, our first, institutional round, a year and a half ago. And then we did another one, half a year ago from today.
Wow, congrats. That's really great. That's awesome.
Thanks.
So I want to dive a little bit deeper into the product and how does somebody actually get started? I know it's hard when it's not visual, but how do you explain it to somebody when you're not in front of a computer?
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, at the core of it is we enable subscription programs for physical products. So,
Okay.
Think about, subscribe and save or subscription boxes or memberships or whatever it might be. And we service e-commerce merchants, right? Mainly merchants in a digital manner.
Okay.
And so when we're enabled basically on their site, the end shoppers can then buy these products on subscription. And then we provide all the tool sets where their customers can manage those products, right?
Got you.
Yeah, and then we kind of have like a turnkey, so like, the fancy word today is low code, no code, but
Yep.
like a lot of it is just like, how can a non-developer set this thing up and be able to customize things up?
Yeah.
And then, then we provide it for developers, all the APIs so that they can fully customize this thing. They can feed the data, they can feed these things into their other products or the rest of their tech stack.
Right. Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. And then obviously, do you maybe want to cover cost quickly or how you guys monetize the platform?
Yeah, totally. So we're almost like a utility company in the sense that we just charge a set percentage fee on whatever flows through our pipes. So the more more money that a merchant processes, the more we have our percentage and we take a cut. And so it was always a kind of a beautiful model in the sense that we're completely aligned with our merchants. And so as they become more successful, we become more successful. And we, at one point we had like a plan, but we scrapped it because we wanted to make it so that the barriers of entry for as many merchants as possible could start using this and become successful.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess like with server costs and this stuff going way down, it makes sense that you guys went the way you did. Fair to say?
Yeah, that and also like we just saw like, part of our marketing and go-to-market costs are supporting, tens of thousands of small guys that we might only break even or make marginal amounts, as a way to kind of enable stores.
Got you. Okay. And then what's the migration process like to actually move my company to Recharge?
Yeah, totally. I mean, is it easy as going to the website for Recharge and, choosing your platform and getting going, right? Like it's pretty simple. If you have existing subscribers and merchant, customers, we can easily migrate those over. So pretty simple process.
Very cool. So I'm curious, you mentioned you bootstrapped this thing into and then eventually ended up raising money. What advice do you give to people and maybe some stuff that you've learned along the way, building a bunch of products? Because you've obviously been successful. It can be really challenging bootstrapping, but what advice do you give people, especially maybe during some of the low points?
I think first is you have to really want it, right? Like you have to like understand why you're starting a company, why are you building this product and this market and for this customer? So understand those things. Two is like, I firmly believe like choose the right markets. And if something is not working, don't keep on trying to go down the same path. Like switch it up. Like you have to like, the quicker you can move into product market fit, the better, right? And so usually that's where I see a lot of people, either they've chosen the wrong market or they've chosen a problem set that's just not deep enough, right? And differentiated enough for them to go after.
Sure.
I think for kind of bootstrapping or non-bootstrapping, I mean, I've always felt like money's a good servant, not a good master. And so just understand like why you're raising money and what you're trying to accomplish. And, I think the beauty about, especially earlier on in your career of bootstrapping a company, is that you're not a lottery ticket. At the end of the day, the way a lot of the VC models work is like, they invest in, 50 companies, and out of those 50 companies, like 10 gets a Series A, and then, one gets into a Series B, right? And so
right.
I personally never wanted to be a lottery ticket. Now, the caveat I would say is the fundraising environment is so good now that people can take secondary at early stages. So maybe there's less lottery ticketness involved nowadays. But, I kind of always wanted to create my own company and control it early on. And then the last thing I always think about, there is no art without constraints. And like, that's something they always teach you in art school. And, so you have to figure out what are the constraints to the problems that you're going after and the solution you're going to provide, so that, and try to focus that as much as possible to validate, hey, is this going to be a business or not?
Yeah, no, I think that's actually really good advice. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on roadmap, because it can be really challenging to, obviously you're getting requests from your customers or potential customers. And then obviously you have a vision for where you want to take the product. How have you managed that over the years, and what advice do you give to people? Because I think that's one of the hardest things, especially bootstrapping a company, that I've found.
Yeah, totally. Well, I think like you have to deeply listen to your customers, but this is not just like, it isn't your customer's job to describe the solution, right? It's their job to describe the problem and deeply, and what are they trying to accomplish, right? And so like, there's the famous like Henry Ford quote, he said like, if I listened to customers, I would have built a better buggy, right? Like,
yeah.
Like, so I think that's one, is like, if you truly deeply understand your customers, then you can know the sequencing, right? So you can know like what needs to come next to drive the most value for your customers, right?
Sure.
And so I think that's a big thing, is like that deep understanding, and then the sequencing. And then I think people don't talk about this enough, but I feel like a lot of startups really drown in opportunity, right? Like there's just too much they can do.
Yeah.
And so they try to do it all, and they don't actually stay focused and do the right sequencing to get the momentum within a given problem area, right? So yeah.
Interesting. I agree with you 100%. And it's interesting that nobody talks about that. So how did you learn that or figure that out? Is it trial and error, or what made you come to that realization?
Like sequencing?
Yeah.
Or
Because your comment about basically taking their problem and then you coming up with a solution. I think most people are just like, oh, you want this feature? I'll build this feature. It's like, yeah, but that's maybe not exactly what the customer needs, right? They want a solution to problem X, but they might not tell you how to, like, you don't want them to tell you how to solve X, right? You want them to just say like, we really want to be able to do this thing. And then it's up to you as software to say like, okay, we're going to solve it like this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Totally. Like, yeah, like, I think, in my previous startup, like I built all the features the customers asked, and they didn't go anywhere, right?
Yeah,
so like
I've done that too.
Right. Like I realized that you can do a lot of waste because of that.
Totally.
And that there's something underlining, like, there's like the jobs to be done framework, which is quite popular now. But back then when I first read about it, I was like, holy crap, this is like it. Like, you have to underline what is like the underlying job that the customer is paying you money to do, right? And what are they trying to achieve? And then tackle that, right? And then from there, you need to be very careful of prioritizing of like what actually unlocks the next most value for your customer, and realizing that like most things are like very marginal, right? That you can build out, like an example is like, we just rolled out, in the last 6 months, user permissions, right? And like people ask us for years for user permissions, and it's actually very important. And there's a really rational use case for it. Like, people want to have, customer support reps manage a lot of things in the Recharge platform, right? And they don't want people to have access to things like discounts, right?
Sure.
And, but we never lost a customer because of user permissions, and we never got a customer because of user permissions. And none of our customers ever made more money than with user permissions, right? So like that was one where like high demand, but does it actually move the customer's like core job that they're, paying us money to do? No. Now we rolled it out because we got to the point where like, as we started to deal with bigger and bigger merchants, it actually did become a requirement to do business, right? And, it got to the point too where existing merchants were like, you have to still do these things too. You can't just say no to people all the time forever, right? So that, so that's a little bit of the balance too. You can't be dogmatic about any of this stuff. So
it's interesting because it's all about timing, right? And when it fits into your roadmap and your growth strategy, right? Because obviously if you would have added these features years ago before you had some of these bigger merchants, it wouldn't have really made a big difference, but now it's making a difference. And I think adding it into your roadmap and your growth strategy, I think people forget about that second half a lot when trying to plan their roadmap.
Oh, 100%, because so much of this stuff is like, how do you get momentum to build momentum, right?
Totally.
And so like, it's like a snowball effect. And so it's like the quicker that you can speed up the momentum and in the right direction of where you want to go, the better. And so like, you only have so much, you can actually build or do. And so you have to really be strategic. And I think that's like, that question sequencing is so important. And the problem is like a lot of times people do it, either people don't have the full perspective of what's going on in a business. And so they kind of give you advice on what you should do, right? Which is like, probably a lot of investors are like that because, they're not running your business. They're not in the day-to-day. So they don't have the full context to understand the sequencing, right? Or even advisors are like this too. And so you kind of have to like, with these things, talk to a lot of people, but also like have like a healthy skepticism, right? Because only you know the best sequencing because you have the best contextual awareness of what should come next that'll drive the most value.
Interesting. Totally. Yeah. No, that's actually really good advice. So you touched on it quickly, but you have basically a remote workforce. How did you decide to do that early on? And what are the pros and cons and advice you'd give for having people all over the globe?
Yeah, totally. So I think a couple things. First, like, we've always had this like mantra that like, make our customers successful, make our team members successful, right? And the success of everyone involved will mean that Recharge will be successful, right? So it was very much a like alignment around value, right? And we just felt like the type of people we want to work with and ourselves as well, like we wanted to be able to kind of work wherever we wanted to be in the world, right? And we kind of wanted to create that like work life or like how that fits, right? And, I'm a perfect example is like, I love like, coding and working on things in the middle of the night, right? And, in the traditional environment, that's just not appropriate. Like an office,
fair
like
enough.
people start to judge you if you don't come into work till 12 o'clock.
Yep. No, fair enough. Yep.
But in a remote environment, like no one judges you, right? Like everyone just judges you on the output, right? It's a very much a meritocracy where people are judged on the best ideas and output, right? And so I think it just resonated with us early, as well as, for us to be able to compete for talent and for great people. We were based in LA and there was just like a lot of corporations and, you have Google and Amazon, all these other corporations that have large offices here. And so it felt like we could differentiate ourselves for that global talent pool. And by going remote by default, a lot of companies, not especially with COVID, have provided remote options. But the reality is you can't have like a office culture and a remote culture. It's one or the other. And what I mean by this is like all the senior people are going into a room and having a Zoom, they're going to forget to Zoom or bring other people in. Or they're going to turn the Zoom off when the meeting's done and they're all going to talk to each other, right? And they're going to socialize. And there's going to be a group of people that are just left out of the mix. And so we committed very early on, like, hey, we're just going to do remote by default. And, it's just going to be the life that we want to live and also be able to get the talent, a bigger talent pool.
No, makes total sense. And I also think too, when you want people to be creative or code, they need to be the most comfortable, whatever that means to them, right? And if that's working 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, fine. If that's working some of that, working through the night, fine. Like, do you really, I never understood, like, if it's Monday and you need something Thursday, why do people care when it's done between Monday and Wednesday, right? As long as they have it for Thursday, does it really matter? Like, that never.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, just I don't know.
And
But
you know
go ahead.
and the funny thing is too is like in an office culture, people judge things that are not output related often, right? They judge like how nice somebody is, or like when do they come to work and when do they leave work. And when you're remote, all you see is that output. Like, did he get things done Thursday?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's interesting. It's like, just because you sit at a desk 9 to 5 doesn't mean you're working, right? Like,
No.
interesting. So, yeah, I think it'll kind of continue. So I'm curious then, you guys have been at this for a number of years now. You raised some money after you bootstrapped this thing. What actually wanted you to actually decide to start raising money?
Yeah, a couple things. First is like the business was growing so quick.
Okay.
Like every year we were doubling and tripling in size.
Congrats, that's awesome.
Yeah, it was great, you know. And I think at a certain point we realized that we were starving the business, right? We needed to raise money to reach the potential of the market, right? Two is we realized, as being the market leaders in our sector, that, you know, having the momentum and having a lot of money on deck would allow us to do uncompetitive things, right? And what I mean by that is we could play a different game than other people due to our size and our momentum and our cash balance. And I think that's something like we started to see, you know, not people in our space, you know, in our direct industry or competitors do, but like in the broader whole. And we just saw how powerful that is, right? To be able to play different games than your competition. And so that's why we decided to do it. You know, it was to lean in and take advantage of the market.
Interesting. No, I think that's really smart and makes a lot of sense, right? So I'm curious, without, you know, like talking about anything that you're not going to release, but like, where do you guys go from here? You raised a bunch of money, you have people kind of all over the world, you're obviously doing really well. How do you guys kind of get it to the next level, or what does that potentially look like?
Yeah, totally. So I think first is like we're early days in commerce, right? Like, you know, COVID's accelerated a lot of user behavior, accelerated a lot of these merchants.
Right.
But what it becomes is TBD, right? And I think, you know, anyone that looks more than a year out in this market probably is looking too far out because of just how quickly things are changing, right? So I think one is we're always going to be very much glued to what the customer needs, how to move the needle for our customers, make them more successful, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, I think we're going to be very much leaning into, you know, subscription commerce. Like, it's a category that's just growing every year quite rapidly, and making sure that we stay as the market leader. So I think, you know, overall, we're a very competitive, paranoid group like that wants to push things forward and make it great. So yeah, we'll just continue to do that.
No, very, very cool. So I'm curious to dive maybe a little bit deeper into some of the developer stuff. How does, or what advice, or how long does it take to actually get up and running with your API?
Yeah, totally. So, you know, right now our API, you know, probably has hundreds of millions of API calls a month. You know, we have, you know, thousands of developers who are actively built things on top of it and are working on it. And so, you know, one of our big initiatives always first was to kind of go API first, right? How do we provide the best building blocks for developers to build these new commerce experiences on top of us?
Right.
And so, and you know, it came from too, is like, while we were running that, you know, agency in commerce and also being developers ourselves, we just kind of learned what developers needed, right? So very much it was like, you know, comes down to the actual platform and the APIs themselves and what that is. Two is like, what is the documentation, right? And treating the documentation as its like own standalone product in a lot of ways. And then 3, supporting it, right? Like having great developer support via Slack channels and elsewhere, right? And so I think, for us, a lot of commerce is starting to get more sophisticated, and it needs these APIs and these tools. And so we've put a lot of investments in there to kind of support developers and be the best platform for them to work off for subscription commerce.
Sure. No, that's cool. You guys also will help people find an agency or tech partners. Do you want to talk about some of the partnerships and how customers can leverage those?
Yeah, totally. So, like we know, like whatever kind of turnkey tool sets that we provide to the merchants is like, there's always going to be that next level of customization they need, right?
Right.
And so, we build out these great building blocks for developers, but a lot of people, especially in commerce, don't have in-house developers. They have agencies. And so we've provided through, the hundreds of agencies that we work with, I think we have maybe over 1,000 agencies in the program, is kind of like, 1, the support and training around our APIs and tool sets. But 2 is we also provide matching between, merchants and agencies to kind of solve their needs as well.
Right. Got you. Okay. No, that's very cool. You guys also have put together a pretty good learning resource library, blog, and podcast. Do you want to talk about why you think that's so important?
Yeah, totally. Well, I mean, as a developer product person at heart, like oftentimes, like I don't really want to talk to anyone. Like I just want to get somewhere, start, roll up a sandbox account, start playing around and building things and trying them out, right? And so, I think we've always, we're always striving to do that more and more so that, people can just use Recharge, right? And have the education materials. I also think another thing that's great about this stuff is like, especially running an agency, you're so busy, you don't really know what should be built or how things should be set up. And so the more that other people can kind of show you the building blocks and then teach you like, oh, here's what some best practices or here's how you should do things, the quicker you can get going, the more successful you can be, right? And so there's nothing worse than like kind of like not, going to a new project or new area and like having to look at a new set of APIs and having no like foundations or, to get going, right? And so we've always tried to support developers and agencies as much as possible.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. The other thing that I've never seen before that I thought was really cool that you guys do is you also have a second blog around culture. Why do you think that was so important, and why did you guys launch that?
Yeah, I think, well, first is like I always feel like culture has to be binary, right? It has to actually mean something, and it has to be like what decisions people make when no one else is watching and no one else is judging. Right?
It's like, fair.
It's like the operating system. And I felt like a big part of that is trying to polarize interviews and who wants to work at your company and who actually you hire and who actually stays in the process. Because like, especially in this world, like we can all do so many different things. And the question really is about fit and alignment, right? And so the more that we can be transparent about what we value and who we are, the more that we will either be the right place for certain people and they'll gravitate to us, or we'll be polarizing and people will be like, man, I really don't want to work with those guys. I'm not applying there. That's what you want. And so I think it just saves everyone a lot of time if you do that up front.
No, I 100% agree with you. So obviously you guys have been doing this remote thing. It's been successful and you have a good culture. What advice do you give to others that are going to basically either want to embrace this because, as we hopefully come out of the pandemic, to actually keep some people remote or maybe a bit of a hybrid model? What advice do you give to people?
I mean, I think I haven't seen the hybrid model really work, especially at scale. So I think choose which one you want, right? Do you want to build a remote culture? Do you want to build a office culture, right?
Yeah.
I think too is like, with anything with culture is like being opinionated, choosing like what you stand for and what you believe in, and using that as a way to hire people and fire people and promote people, and don't feel shy, like just because someone's super smart and talented doesn't mean like they're going to be the best fit at your endeavors.
I actually think that's really good advice. So I'm curious, is there any other advice that you would give to an entrepreneur maybe early on when they're bootstrapping? Because sometimes it can be terrible, for lack of a better term for it. And how did you kind of press on, and what made you, just kind of keep seeing, where you wanted to be? Because I think that's really challenging sometimes.
Yeah, totally. One of the best pieces of advice I ever had was like to reach out to lots of people and try to get mentors, right? And try to get advisors.
Sure.
And, I think we've constantly, like my co-founder and I have constantly done that, is like, if you're going down a path and you've never gone down that path before, find out who's gone down that path and learn from them. And it'll just like, it'll give you a map of what you need to do, right? And you just won't make the same beginner mistakes, and it'll just accelerate things. So like finding those people that accelerate you is going to be the key, And like, people are always like, well, those people don't live in my town or my city and everything. And like, when we started, it wasn't a huge tech scene and we didn't really know anyone. And honestly, all we did was just hit people up on LinkedIn, and we just offered to pay for their time. And we just told them, we're like, hey, we're just some young entrepreneurs trying to figure this shit out. And you know what? The vast majority of the good people were like, love to talk, love to help you. And it's like, it always surprises me how few people do that, right? And like how much that provides the advice and mentorship that like kind of defines like their whole career and how they make decisions.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because anytime I've ever got asked that, and it sounds so stupid to say, it's like anything I've ever gotten in life, I just asked. Sure, I've been turned down more times than I can probably remember, but majority of people will genuinely help out as long as you don't ask for like 100 things and you try to be respectful, right? If you're like, can I pick your brain for 15 minutes or buy you like most people will be like, yeah, sure, no problem, right? But if you're like, can I spend 4 hours of your time and you have to drive 4 hours, they're going to be like, sorry, it's not going to happen, right?
Totally. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's like, just ask. And, it was funny, like, we would always offer to pay people, on LinkedIn. Yep. And I don't think anyone ever took us up on that. But it showed like, hey, we're not trying to waste your time. Totally. And we value it. And we just love your help and your advice on something. And yeah, so it's super simple.
No, I think that's really good advice, but we're kind of coming to the end of the show. So how about we close with mentioning where people can get more information about Recharge and anything else you want to mention?
Yeah. So to get more information, just go to rechargepayments.com. And if there's any way I can ever help you, hit me up on LinkedIn. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be on the show, and I look forward to keeping in touch with you, and have a good rest of your day.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks so much for having me.
All right. Thank you. Okay. Bye.
Thanks for listening. Please visit our website at buildingthefutureshow.com to join the free community, sign up for our newsletter, or to sponsor the show. The music is done by Electric Mantra. You can check him out at electricmantra.com and keep building the future.